Hello, everybody. We are on GlobalETs, Jean Librero. It is the ninth interview on the channel. We are on Monday, July 27th. I am with new guest Peter ROBBINS, UFO investigator from the United States, very famous author. I want to remind here that I will do an interview related to abduction studies, abduction cases, and it will be the third interview on this subject. So first of all, I introduce you to our guest, Mr. Peter ROBBINS. Hello, Peter.
Hi, Jean.
Thank you very much. I'm very touched. I'm very honored, proud to welcome you. I thank you warmly for accepting agreeing to this interview to a small channel when you have been received by Coast to Coast and all the big channels for several decades. So thank you for your support. And I am very happy to welcome you on a subject we agreed upon together, talking about first a portrait of yourself as an investigator. That's a respect we have to show for you to come on here. And plus, you have not been invited frequently on French channels, or at least for several years, I guess. So it's important to introduce you to the French people who have to know more about international researchers. And then we'll talk about Bud Hopkins. You were a friend with Bud Hopkins for many years, for over 35 years, and you have been assistant to Bud Hopkins, who was an artist, a painter, famous, established artist, and who has been a pioneer in studies into alien abduction cases. So first of all, Peter, we let you introduce yourself with your own words and briefly with the humility you always show in these circumstances.
Well, I am an investigative writer who specializes in the subject of UFOs, UAPs. I began my professional career as a painter and photographer, but a memory from childhood that I had repressed of a profoundly unambiguous UFO sighting that I had as a child with one of my sisters. This memory returned when I was in my late 20s and obsessed me. And I basically stopped being a painter and began to work in this field.
Yes. You had a career as a painter. Thank you for this short introduction, Peter. You have studied arts, visual arts. You taught at the School of Visual Arts in New York City, Manhattan. Can you recall your beginning of your career?
Well, it began when I was a little boy. I had a gift for drawing and painting that thankfully my teachers and my parents recognized when I was very young, and it was encouraged. And my intention was to be a successful, internationally known artist. I was not looking to paint pretty pictures and sell them at the fair on Sunday. I was looking to be in museums and important collections around the world. And it is something you must be very dedicated to do. And I was doing it and living my dream, working for famous artists at different times, being invited to teach at my alma mater, the School of Visual Arts, as you have mentioned. And it was a very exciting time to be in New York City, to be a young artist, to be part of that community. And when this memory came back at me, it's difficult to describe the impact that it had on my life. It was as though I was a railroad train and I jumped the tracks. I could go no further because something more important had come into my life, and I resented it very much. I was not interested in the work. I never thought about UFOs. I knew nobody who was interested in it. I assumed it was nonsense, like the adult world had always said. But my sister's confirmation of my memory made it very real. And I couldn't get back in the full commitment. In my heart, there was something else. And it took me quite some years and the help of a very wonderful psychotherapist to help me to understand that what had happened was very real, that I wasn't crazy, the world was crazy, and that this phenomena was very important. And in a way, it helped me make the transition from resigned, unhappy, feeling isolated, to taking on this work because it is so important and because I was now obsessed with it. My sister had shared some memories with me after we confirmed the actual sighting. And you know, Jean, because you have done a great deal of work in the abduction field, you have heard the stories, you have spoken to some of the most best known and most respected people in the field. And it's back when my sister first told me of her memories of abduction, I had never read anything about it. I had never even really heard about it, except somewhere in my mind, I remembered news about Betty and Barney Hill case when it finally became public news several years after it happened. It was in all of the newspapers and the magazines, but it was, a passing thing for me. I didn't think of it or remember it. But my sister's conscious memories that she had never forgotten, describing being on board, walking through a metal hallway, being on the table, being examined. I thought for some seconds maybe my sister had gone insane. But then I caught myself and I had to laugh in a way because I knew in my mind 6-7 seconds earlier, I was perfectly accepting of the fact that we had seen 5 flying saucers with windows on them over the neighbor's house. And I thought I should listen to what my sister's saying. Well, now, many years later, I have heard these same things from other people, sometimes the exact same words, dozens and dozens of times, word for word. And this changed both of our lives, of course. Helen never forgot it, but she was smart enough as a little girl to intuit, to understand that this was something to keep private. And so she never shared those memories. And when we were having this very first phone call, I said, how have we never spoken about this? Because you remember that part. And she said, well, later that day, I came up to you and I said, do you want to talk about this? And do you remember what you said to me? I said, yes. I said, no, I don't want to talk about this. And it's so funny in life sometimes how simple something can be that becomes very complex. In this case, she said, you're my brother. I love you. I respect you. I knew you were very anxious about this. And so I didn't mention it. And that day led to the next week, to the next month, to the next year. and the years that followed. And here we are. Then she said something I will always remember. She said, but there's more. And I don't remember exact words, but I don't know how you're going to feel about it. And that's when she told me these memories about abduction. Well, you know, people use the phrase, my life changed overnight. Mine changed in a minute. And although I was still full-time artist, that afternoon, everything that I'd been doing for years, I set aside, and it was like I didn't have a choice. I just started drawing different kinds of UFOs over and over and over. And then I just started drawing ellipses, just filling pages with them. The nearest thing I can compare it to is the obsession of the wonderful character that Richard Dreyfuss created for us in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, his obsession with the Devil's Tower. My real story was 2 years before that, so I didn't watch the movie and get the idea, but I couldn't stop. And again, this ultimately led me to find a wonderful therapist who helped me get my life back on track to the best degree that I could. And that is how I began in this work.
Okay, thank you. How old were you, Peter, please, when your sister finally gave a full account to you?
I think 28, almost 29, thereabouts.
Mhm. Okay, before getting into your beginning of your career as an investigator, I wanted just to say that the bottom picture you have in the presentation here, I think it is your speech at the Exeter conference last year in 2025. Do you remember?
Not from the photos, but I certainly spoke at Exeter, New Hampshire conference last year. It's the one conference that I regularly speak at that I'm very proud to be a co-producer of.
Okay, and I watched part of your presentation. I found it, I don't know if it was in YouTube or Spotify, and you were talking about, it was called Graphics and Classics. And
Yes.
so, so you were talking about arts to design book covers. So I mention that because it refers to your early and career, the career you have in your heart still, because an artist is always an artist.
Absolutely true. And the fact that I ultimately stopped, although I continued on for some years, one way or another, my love of art, modern, ancient, classical periods, impressionism, on down the line has never diminished. I visit museums when I can every week for my Facebook friends and other friends on the social network. I will post a painting on a Saturday and a drawing on Sunday, and often some very interesting discussions happen about that. I think about the times when I started, when for some years, my obsession with the subject really didn't allow much else in my life. And like you, probably I have many other interests, things that have nothing to do with it. But it was just like that. And that was not healthy. As I kind of normalized my attitude, I was able to re-embrace things like the theater, visual arts, history, architecture, life in New York City, politics, that make up a more complete person.
Peter, I'd not thought about that, but I must say here to you and to the people who will watch, I regularly watch your Facebook page, and thank you very much for it, Peter, because you give insights into so many beautiful things of what we call thinking, philosophy, art, creation, culture.
Yes. I know from just knowing a certain amount of history, from a knowledge of French art, especially modern art, that the French have a much higher percentage of regular folks appreciating great art. In America, not so much. But one of the great things about great art is that it belongs to us all. And you don't have to be a PhD or a professor to appreciate, to love, to be moved by great paintings, sculptures, architecture. Is something I love about the fabric of life in French culture. We do not have that here quite as much.
And art puts us together. Your page is really beautiful. I encourage everybody who knows about, well, whether UFO things or not, but on interested in culture, to watch your page, because you find so many things every day, and you have a lot of wits. It's impressive. You make us laugh as well. It's beautiful page. I encourage anybody, women of any country, to get to your page to get to the richness of culture, international culture, contemporary culture, old culture, art, philosophy, theater, literature. Wow.
Yes, of course, literature as well.
So thank you very much. Um, so now, on the beginning of your career, um, you are an editorial assistant to the United Nations General Secretary's report for the establishment of a UFO department at the United Nations. Can you recall that
Oh, yes,
briefly?
yes.
It's not too much.
Briefly, my very first mentor was a wonderful man, a naturalized American citizen born in Hungary. Coleman von Kavetsky was his name. And Coleman, during the war, was a staff officer for the Royal Hungarian Army. He was in charge of photo analysis and photo education for the Army. And he was the very first person in the field that I decided to reach out to. For any of your viewers who know Manhattan or New York City a little bit, I lived in Lower Manhattan in Chinatown. Coleman lived in Queens, the next borough over. You could just take a subway and go there. And he invited me to meet him. And it was a very reflective ride, only maybe half an hour. But I'm thinking to myself, this is the first man I've ever met who fought in an army that was on the side of the Nazis. I'm Jewish. How am I going to feel about this? Well, it was a wonderful afternoon. He basically invited me in. His wife brought us coffee and cookies. We're in what would have been a guest room, second bedroom in another apartment, but it was an office filled with books, certificates, photographs, filing cabinets. And he told me the story of his life, including how effective the Germans were in putting the terrible fear of communism into the minds of so many, the rest of Europe, that fascism seemed preferable. And how at the end of the war, they were all of the staff officers, as the war was ending terribly, were told to essentially run, to take their families and try to get to the American lines, because if they encountered Russians, everybody would be killed. And he said it was the scariest 24 hours of his life with his wife and their infant son. They made their way to the American lines. Because Coleman spoke Hungarian, German, some Polish, English, they put him to work helping to repatriate families who had lost members during the Holocaust. with him working to reunite these people for 7 years. And at the end of those 7 years, the American government said, in so many words, thank you. If you would like to be an American citizen now, you are welcome. He emigrated to America in 1952 with his family, and several months later was the famous UFO overflights over Washington, D.C. And as a photo analyst, he immediately became involved in this work. Your question, though, was about this initiative in the United Nations, which was in 1978, to do nothing more than attempt to create a permanent committee of the nations to study this question and to compare notes. Very simple. It was led by the very small Caribbean nation of Grenada. Their prime minister, Sir Eric Gary, had seen UFOs. And at the time, the Secretary General of the UN was Kurt Waldheim.
What name?
It was not yet public. It was a few years later that we learned that he not only served in the German army, he was SS. Well, what are you going to do? But Coleman and he corresponded on UFOs rather regularly, and they shared a concern, which we should all still share. I think it was very visionary, which was, what if someday a genuine, unidentified flying object, a truly anomalous machine from parts unknown, came into Soviet then or American airspace, would not identify itself, was misinterpreted as incoming missiles, and starting World War III. And he needed editing for this long paper, about 80 pages or so, that he wrote. And myself and my first contemporary colleague, Antonio Huneeus. Antonio was, still is, a Chilean-American national. His father was a diplomat at the United Nations. He was a graduate of the journalism school at the Sorbonne, trilingual. And we worked together as editors on this paper. We were not paid. We were both novices, but we were invited to these meetings at the UN, which was fascinating. And in fact, the initiative passed, but then was left to die in committee. But here I am, very new to the work, sitting in the General Assembly, and who am I watching on the floor there speak to the delegates? Dr. Jacques Vallée, Dr. Alan Hynek, Stanton Friedman, a wonderful, very important military witness. Astronaut Gordon Cooper was supposed to be speaking, but the day before, New York City had had a tremendous blizzard, and there were no flights in or out, so his statement was read into the record. But I would not meet or speak to Stanton Friedman really for almost 10 years after that. But he was very taken aback when I told him the circumstances that I first saw him speak in. So I was very fortunate in that sense. And 2 years later, Coleman was asked by a member of Parliament, the British Parliament, named Brinsley Lepore Trench, the Earl of Clantrety, who was on his own sponsoring a UFO initiative in Parliament. And would Coleman participate and write a paper for it? And once again, Antonio and I were invited to edit. So a few years in, I had these extraordinary credits. I had never even gone to a UFO conference. But I was very fortunate again in the way that I started out. And not long after I met Coleman, I met my second mentor, who was a wonderful UFO researcher and a highly decorated New York City police detective. And then I met Bud Hopkins, and that was the most influential person in my life and work as far as UFO goes.
Okay, thank you very much. Very clear, detailed. introduction. I wanted to thank you. I wanted to tell you, Peter, when I read your resume, that it's a new partly, that I heard about this Hungarian staff officer, Mr. Coleman Kowalski. I read about him in a book by an Italian researcher with Mr. Roberto Pinotti. I guess you have heard his name. If you don't know him personally, you know his name, of course.
Yes. Coleman is, he's one of those people that the international UFO community should know more about, respect for his pioneering efforts. In Hungary, he was regarded as something of a national hero. And when he died at the age of 89, it touched me very deeply. I had never had such an old friend die, and I thought maybe it hurts less because they're old. But you know, when somebody you love goes, it hurts. And his coffin was draped with a Hungarian flag, an honor guard. It was very moving and very appropriate for somebody of his stature.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Roberto Pinotti was at the House of Lords initiative. What happened? It was in 1984, 1981, more or less. That's it. The House of Lords debate on UFOs with
1980.
1980. Okay. And Roberto Pinotti was there. He had been invited. Do you remember that?
Well, I wasn't able to attend the meetings at Parliament, but I certainly heard about them. And in the case of the United Nations, I should also say that although Sir Eric Gehry was the front man, so to say, it was really somebody else, a young American, who pushed him, who inspired him, who helped him to make this happen. And that was a young man who had started a career as a folk singer. And that's what he wanted to do until he had a profound UFO event in his life as well. And he went on to become one of our leading UFO journalists. And he was the one who made this happen behind the scenes. And it's just a reminder that individuals can change history. It's not regularly the case, but we can all make an impact in our lives.
Who was this journalist, Peter?
Yeah, I'm blanking at the moment. I didn't sleep that much last night, as you know. I'll think of it in a minute. We'll come back to it.
Okay. I would like
Spiegel. I'm sorry, Lee Spiegel.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Lee Spiegel, yes.
For many years also wrote for a very influential publication, the Huffington Post. He was their UFO and paranormal journalist, and a nicer, more gregarious, life-loving man you never met. And as it happened sometime several years ago, he was taken by cancer, and a number of friends got together and took advantage of a program whereby after cremation, some of your ashes are sent into space. And so I think he has come back to Earth now, but for quite some months, we loved thinking of Lee circling us above.
Great. Thank you. Okay. So in a moment, we will talk about your collaboration to the movie industry, because it's something important. in the life of UFO things, and you have had an important work there. But anyway, just let's go to Mr. Bud Hopkins. So, how did you meet him? How did you meet with this person?
I was about a year into my involvement in the work. And in that year, I had made a few friends. I had started to buy books. At the time, most of the publications that I was aware of were very tabloid, very lurid, very sensationalistic. They didn't interest me much, but I was starting to, at least read them a bit. And one afternoon, I was walking by a newspaper kiosk in Midtown Manhattan, where they sell the newspapers and magazines. And one of our weekly newspapers, in no way a UFO-related publication, it had a headline. And the headline read, quote unquote, "Sane man sees UFO." Well, I stopped cold. I bought the newspaper. I took it home. I read it in one.
The Village Voice.
Yes, the Village Voice, which was much more a political, progressive newspaper, but there it was. And the first thing was I realized this was the best written and researched single case that I had encountered so far. And that whoever wrote it, I wanted to write like that. I wanted to be able to have that objectivity. And the artist's name was the author's name was Bud Hopkins. Well, the New York City art world, if you're in it, is somewhat incestuous and small. And I knew there was a late period abstract expressionist by that name, spelling his first name with 2 D's. And I went to the New York City phone book. I opened it up, I found it, and I just called him. And our first conversation was, "Hello, Mr. Hopkins, you don't know me. My name is Peter Robbins. I'm an artist. I teach painting at the School of Visual Arts. I become very interested in UFOs. I had a sighting with my sister, and my sister and I feel that something very definitely happened to us. So I have no idea. I'm beginning one of the most important friendships of my life, and 35 years of being close to this person. And the very first question he asked me was, "Tell me about your art." That didn't go so good. I was coming from minimalist, conceptualist background and tradition. He much more traditional. So we started to talk about my sister, and he invited me to come have coffee at his house a few days later. And we did just that. We sat at his kitchen table and talked about art, life, UFOs, this whole idea of some UFOs with intelligent beings were taking people. And it was something I had not looked into, that he was just beginning to look into. And so began a friendly acquaintanceship that over the next few years became a real friendship. We would go out to museums together, just enjoy walking around the city, lots of conversations about politics. Bud was a true intellectual. He was very well read and kept up on the news. He was a progressive in his thinking and a humanist. And 5 years later, he published his first book. By then, we had become quite close friends, and it was a pioneering UFO book called Missing Time. You have, I know, the cover there. It was a study, I think, of 7 people who had had what we call missing time experiences, a phenomena that we associate with being taken or other paranormal type events. And it changed his life very much. Overnight, he went from being Bud Hopkins uh, well-known painter in New York, with an interest in UFOs, to Bud Hopkins, better known as a UFO abduction researcher, who also happened to be a painter. And then the mail started coming in. And if he would do a television show that a lot of people watched, we could get 100 letters the next week. He was very traditional in the way that he dealt for his whole career with people approaching him. Back then, it was either on telephone or the mail. You know, this is way pre-digital. And every time somebody would write him for any reason, I think this happened to me. I think it happened to somebody I know. I want to know more. Can you send me an autograph? I have a question for you. He or I would always write a personal note on our stationery and send it back. And from then on and off, I worked for him regularly. In 1987, his probably most popular and best-selling book, Intruders, was released, and that came out all over the world, I think in something like a dozen different translations, making him truly internationally respected. Anyway, from there, of course, other books followed, as did our friendship and the amount of work that I did for him over the years, and will never regret and always feel privileged to have spent that time in that manner.
Thank you. Peter, can you say a word about his investigation? We see an author, very famous author. It's very nice to hear Bud Hopkins in video, in a speech, or in an interview. Okay, but it is impossible to achieve such a big work without help. You have been an assistant to him, but what do you say? How did he gather so much information? How did he investigate all these cases through telephone, through mail, through personal meeting? How do you explain, describe his work? I think it's important for people to think about all that.
That's a great question, Jean. When you train, either formally or informally, to have a career in the visual arts, especially in the world of modern art, a good deal of your training, your thinking, your conditioning is the English phrase, thinking outside of the box. You're also driven by a desire to investigate mysteries of creativity within yourself. I think a crucial aspect has to be that part of your nature, your makeup, your character, is you have a deep curiosity about different things, so much so that you investigate these things as you move through your life. Maybe you have had a similar path as me, but my reading life has changed regularly. I am drawn to a subject, I immerse myself in it, I get more books on it, maybe I'll travel to visit, I answer some questions, and it brings me to another subject, especially in terms of, for me, prehistory in the United Kingdom, in Europe, standing stones, ley lines, cairns, ancient mysteries. And over the years, one takes to the other. Bud was, first of all, the best self-trained investigator I ever knew or I ever met. If this bug bites you, you learn basic techniques. He nor I have ever made ourselves out to be journalists. That is the domain of somebody like Leslie Kean, one of our most distinguished and most valued UFO journalists. Ralph Blumenthal as well, Pulitzer Prize winning writer. Yeah. But Bud, almost like a police officer or like an attorney, that methodical part of himself,
law enforcement
to dig down,
officer.
to do the research, to visit archives, to contact the Secret Service, the New York City Police Department, the United Nations, whoever he needed to get to, he found a way. And because he was a very good communicator and understood human nature well enough to know the best way to approach a new situation, I used to joke with him sometimes and say, if you had become a police officer, or a detective, or somebody in law enforcement, God help the criminals in New York City. I mean, he was remarkable like that. And he would just follow that lead right down to its baseline. When he needed help, he would ask for it. But for me, mostly, it was just working around him, keeping things up to date. A charming memory is he wrote almost everything on a small balcony in his art studio, but like a good 10 feet, 3 meters from the floor. I was at a desk directly below him. And when he was writing a book or an article or a review or criticism, as the page would come off the printer, he would drop it. And it would either land on my desk or the floor or my head. And I lived to find an error. He was the best first draft writer I ever knew. He made very few errors, and following these drafts for many years, from when they were written until they appeared in print, sometimes they, unlike most writers, myself certainly, they didn't go through many changes often. It was just the way it was supposed to be the first time it came out. But if I would find a comma where there shouldn't be one, or a semicolon instead of a period, I would have great fun teasing him about that. And when, you do serious work, it can be very stressful. Bud had a wonderful sense of humor. I've got a pretty good one. And there were times that we had no choice but to try to just keep laughing each other, because what we were dealing with was painful or frightening or anxiety provoking. We're feeling our way in the dark, in a way. And the attacks on him were regular, from not skeptics as much as debunkers. You and I, everybody in this work needs to be a skeptic. We have to be skeptical, because we know so much that we are predisposed to accept certain facts or seeming facts. But debunkers, as Bud used to joke, they are the people we should all be looking up to. They actually know that there is no such thing as UFOs or other beings in space. We should greatly respect this, because they are obviously in contact with great powers. Here we are, literally in the dark, feeling our way around, making educated guesses. But of course, these people are the ones to be revered.
Peter, thank you. I was talking with Kathleen Marden. You know her? You wrote to me.
We spoke this morning.
Okay. She told me also that she knows you for long. And we were talking about the debunkers, about Philip Klass that she met. I was telling her that she told me about Donald Menzel, because, as you know, Kathleen Marden is not only a specialist on the alien abduction cases, specialized on the Betty and Barney Hill case, of course, but she's also an investigator into the government UFO cover-up. She has authored books with Stanton Friedman, and she has done this work. So she knows how the people around the government try to debunk, to ridicule, to destroy people. And she talked about people like Donald Menzel, Philip Klass. And I told her that I had spoken to to because she had investigated Philip Glass' archives at the American Philosophical Society. Because also he was a debunker, he had huge files, and it is interesting to get into his file. And I told her that David Jacobs had spoken to me, told me that he was meeting Philip Glass sometimes at UFO conferences. I was talking very nicely as good old friends when he knew perfectly that after the conference, Philip Glass would write an article totally abusive and a lot of lies and disinformation. It's amazing.
I knew Philip Glass a little bit, and for anyone who is not familiar with that name, he was an editor at I don't know, Aviation Weekly or something like that, but he kind of inherited the mantle of chief debunker from a Harvard professor who really was working for the American intelligence community in making the subject seem silly. And in 1987, I was part of a panel discussion with Whitley Strieber, I think with Deb Jordan Cabell at the time, as her name was, several other abductees. I was there in my role as Bud Hopkins' assistant and somebody who had grown up with an abductee in the family. And Philip Glass had seated himself in front row center, and he was snapping pictures of us, smiling at us. And at a certain point, he made Whitley so angry that Whitley just started to yell at him. And he looked like the happiest man in the world. I'm being all this attention on me. He's a son of a bitch, but he could be very charming and very persuasive. And after the panel, he came up to me in the hall, very obsequious kind of body language, very respectful. Mr. Robbins, I was very moved by what you said and happened to your sister and you. And he actually said something like, maybe I really have to rethink this whole thing. I'm buying it. Wow, I've impressed Philip Glass. He said, I wonder if I might interview you. Said, what harm could there be in that? And I did an interview with him. He thanked me very much. And
better not, because it was a trap, whatever, one way or another.
Well, a few months later, I get a letter from him saying, I've written the chapter about you and your sister. I've included it here so you can see it. And when the book comes out, I'd be very happy to send you an inscribed copy. Thank you for this. Well, I read the chapter and I ended up feeling like a cartoon character, with steam coming out of your ears.
That's what David Jacobs told me.
He took my account of my sister's and my sighting and reached the conclusion, with, I guess, knowledge I was not had access to, that we were simply two lonely, imaginative children, and we invented this to make our lives a little more interesting. Well, I'm not a violent person, but I really wanted to punch him. And I got so angry that I wrote quite a letter that then a friend of mine, I was working in theater management at the time, a wonderful Scottish actor, a graduate of the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts in London. He said, I'm pretty good with English. Let me work on the letter with you. Well, we wrote the most wonderful, terrible letter. And I said, I'm not even going to send it to him. I'm going to send it to his lawyer. I did. Less than a week later, I got back a letter from his lawyer, very brief, but very respectful, saying, thank you for your letter. Most impressive argument. If we had received this a week earlier, before the book went to press. And I made it clear that I wasn't interested in a signed copy of the book, although now, why not? But he was really a nasty son of a bitch in that sense. His specialty was destroying or attacking the character of people whose evidence he couldn't even come close to. He did that with Travis Walton, The book that we both appear in, with Travis's account being reduced to nothing, and mine and my sister's being also, was called UFO Abductions, A Dangerous Game. And some years later, when Travis and I became friends, we had a good deal of fun at his expense for taking this ludicrous path. We don't have quite that level of skepticism now that we are in this newer age of acceptance in the world of officialdom, as we know. But it was the norm back then, and you had to live with it. What are you going to do otherwise?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's much to say about it. Yes, Cassie Marden shared things to me that I had no idea. Enfin, I had studied the Betty and Barney Hill case, but I had not been aware that they had suffered so much harassment, both Betty and Barney, Barney and Betty,
Yes.
and he passed away at the age of 46. Well,
Yeah.
an accident, a brain attack, okay, but she suffered much. Travis Walton too, and many other witnesses suffered all kind of petty attacks, and so it made me think that really the powers that be, what we call the government or the agencies, the powers that be, the real power behind all of this cover up, didn't want the thing on the alien abduction come out. And that's why at the end of this talk, I will ask you what you think about the current situation. But just now, please, Peter, let's talk about the Copley Woods events in 1983 in the state of Indiana by the town Indianapolis. A lady called Casey Davis, at the time it was not a real name. Can you recall how Bud Hopkins was involved in this case? What happened at the time?
Kathy, had written Bud a letter, and in it, she went to great pains to be very detailed about her memories, things that she felt had happened to her family, centering around a particular night where a UFO came down in the backyard of the house that she grew up in. And at that point, the electricity in the neighborhood went out. The next day, there was a burn mark in the soil, and nothing would grow there the next season or the season after that. We have photos taken a year or so later where that spot is still blank.
The snow would melt around the spot.
That's right. And some wonderfully nothing, no special effects, but to see these photos and to understand what was really happening here. Also, the family pet, the dog, shortly after died of, I think, a rare cancer. But many people in the neighborhood saw aspects of this, had different memories, and the sincerity of the letter is just that thing of, this is a person and this is a series of incidents that I'm truly drawn to and want to investigate further. And after a number of phone calls, I don't remember whether he visited her and her family first or she came to New York and spent several days with us. Bud had a guest room in his home in New York for most of the time. And that's when I met Kathy in, I guess, either 84, probably about then. And she's still a very special friend of mine. I'm absolutely crazy about her. I'll see her in September at a conference in Michigan that we'll both be at. And we just, fell in love with her as a friend, my sister and I. And she, completely without guile, I don't think she's capable of lying. I mean, I guess everybody is technically, but an honest, decent person with a lot of evidence to back up the extraordinary accounts of what had happened to her. And again, the book, which Bud began, I guess, technically in 83 and completed in, I think, early 87 or late 86. It was published in 87. It deserved the attention that it got, and it brought more serious thinking people to the work and to looking at the possibilities that these seemingly outrageous, crazy claims could be very real.
Okay, right. Let's go into the, let's say her name is Debbie Jordan Cowbell. And the main major event was 30th of June 1983, but she lived many events. Do you remember? Bud Hopkins carried out hypnotic session with her, and they found that she had younger experience. Even she lost a pregnancy when she was 17 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, a long time before she knew she had this experience in 1983.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't remember all of the details, but Deb, like a good number of people that approached Bud over the decades, underwent, I'm sure she'd remember, I think several sessions of hypnotic regression. And let's veer off for a moment here, because these days, most people in the work, they don't think much of hypnotic regression. There's always the possibility that the individual doing the work can be leading you in whatever direction that they want for their own purposes, or it's just not a very scientific tool to come to such extraordinary conclusions about. The fact is, hypnotic regression in the hands of a well-trained, patient, knowledgeable practitioner can be extremely valuable in assisting people in reliving or reobserving extremely memorable, frightening, beautiful events in their lives. And for me, it's still a valuable tool. I say that not as a practitioner. I have never done that because I have no training. But I did have opportunity to witness quite a number of hypnotic regressions that Bud did. This, not Kathy's, but this always with the wishes of the individual and Bud's invitation as well. I was terribly moved by some of what I saw, and Bud's technique. And he trained for 7 years under the watchful eyes of a very respected psychologist named Aphrodite Clamar, who was a real pioneer in the use of hypnotic regression to help address trauma and the like. I don't know anybody else that did that. He would spend sometimes up to 20 minutes assisting the person into a completely relaxed state. And I knew after a number of sessions that while I felt a tremendous sense of privilege being in the room, this was not for me. Being 3 or 4 feet away from somebody reliving the most frightening event in their life, which would sometimes be the case, you are in the wind of this person going through these things. But at one point, some years into our work together, said, for me, it was a great compliment that he thought I should train to do hypnotic regression because I was the right kind of person for it in a number of respects. I was flattered. I thought about it. And when I came back my next shift, it was in part to tell him that I was flattered and I thought it was something I could master, but that I didn't want to. I was comfortable being his assistant. And I also feel and felt that doing that regularly ages you to even a modest degree. It just takes it out of you. It can be exhausting. I think it's heroic, important work, but there are so many people that are hacks or that have agendas or think of the individuals they're working with as a case rather than a human being or, another soul. Anyway, with Deb, in hypnosis, there were things that introduced us or reinforced some tendencies we were seeing in other cases or things other people were remembering, part of which was very uncomfortable and still is for most sane people, the idea of hybrids, individuals that are partly us and partly them, created for whatever reason they are doing this. I don't even think we can think in terms of good or bad. They have an agenda, this particular group that we were focused on, and it is what it is. But Deb, as far as we could ascertain, had one or more children where the fetus was taken before fully developed. And that sounds mad, but I can't even tell you how many cases we had like that. Within a number of cases, obstetricians or gynecologists that the woman had been seeing, in one or two cases, beside themselves, calling to speak to Bud because what had happened, the fetus was there one day and it wasn't there the next, and it didn't accidentally have, abort itself or something. Yeah. Deb, in that sense, was a real pioneer because the patterns that Bud was able to find and explore were easier to recognize when they came up in later cases, some of which he wrote about and some not.
Peter, you see, I watched the interview with this journalist. I forgot to copy the title, The Unexplained. A journalist, a woman, a very nice lady, elegant lady, who was very respectful, and she invited Bud Hopkins and Debbie Cowbell. I don't know if she called her Kathy Davis or Debbie Jordan.
Sure.
Yeah, but this show, it was years ago with a lady, a woman journalist on TV, and there were Bud sitting in a suit with a tie, and Debbie was at his side. Surely this interview. What was striking to me is that Debbie was very quiet, but you could see the tension, an inner tension. You could see in her face, in her glance, in her eyes, the expression of someone who has suffered, who has had pain, but she mastering emotion. She's not overwhelmed by emotion, but you can see that she comes here to bring something terrible, something heavy. And that's up to anyone to understand, to receive that. And since that's something heavy to receive, to give, and difficult to receive as well. But there is no choice, for either we want to know the truth or not. But if she was there to give the truth, and you can see the strength in her, a beautiful strength, someone
Yeah.
who has pain, who does not conceal anything, but she's not dominated by his pain. She's not desperate. And at a certain point, the journalist tell her, "But how did you put up with that? Having children, having your life?" Says, "I am alive. I have my life. I am alive. I have legs. I can walk."
Yeah.
And I cannot say she had a smile. She had a kind of smile with her eyes. It was so moving, Peter. A beautiful.
Yeah. I think when you are immersed in this kind of material, whether you are the being that is having the attention from these other intelligences, or whether you are standing close by trying to put it together for yourself and for the individual, the best of you emerges. You're not there. The reasons that you're doing this, the reasons that you're there, you're not wondering about them. This has been something that has been going on for your life, and this is the most important thing you want to, need to, feel you must explore in this moment. Deb was fortunate in growing up in a great family with wonderful parents and sister. In her dealings with other people, when we first met her, she seemed understandably shy. She was a young woman who grew up in the Midwest, who was transported to downtown Manhattan, and this world of not just one, herself, people that feel they've had these experiences, but a new family of people who feel they've had these experiences. And that was, 40 years ago that she first approached Bud. I know that she still shares friendships back from that time, not just with me, but from other people who were part of that group, and who we still stay in touch, if irregularly.
Peter, as you said, we will not elaborate much on it, but you had the courage to state what was the findings by this investigations by Bud Hopkins, by yourself at his side, and others. This program, this strange program of abduction, of genetics manipulation, and probably hybridation. Can't imagine. We have to think of the situation of a woman, a young woman who knows she's pregnant. She knows she's pregnant, and she lost a baby, and the physician has no explanation, and that happened 10 years afterwards. She has maybe another boyfriend, another husband, but she has a right to have a child, and she lost a child, a fetus, disappears after 3 months. Okay, so Bud Hopkins has written about these things, David Jacobs also. I think we are on a point where there is no debate, there is no serious talk on this issue presently. Many people talk about abduction, but we talk more about the benefits that people can receive in terms of psychic abilities, or about openness to, I think, kind of resilience maybe. But the trauma is there, the violence is there, let's say the crime that has been committed is still a pain in the soul and in the flesh of the person, and not only the person, but the person around her, family, her relatives. So, so the opinion, the theory that Bud Hopkins built must be studied, and to talk about the current situation about disclosure, UFO disclosure, declassification. I am interested in watching the files declassified by the Department of War, because I like documents. Just like you, I have a mind for research. I like documents, and I have a passion for that. And I like to see a document by the FBI, by the CIA, by Wright Patterson Air Force Base, by Washington D.C. and the Senate Journal, the stamps. And it teaches things to us. Okay, but as James Clarkson said to me in one interview I had with him, James Clarkson he was director of MUFON for the state of New York. You probably know him, but it was at McMinnville.
For the state of Washington State, I think.
Yeah, exactly. James Clarkson. He told me the FOIA. The law of liberty of information does not apply to private companies, and these are the people who have the power, who know all about ET presence, not the government agency anymore, but private contractors. But anyway, whatever, and so for him there will no be disclosure from the government. But anyway, do these files, does anyone, even the Member of Parliament, Mr. Eric Burleson or Tim Burkett and Mrs. Paulina Luna, and I respect them, respect a lot what they're doing. It's very interesting, great. But did anyone talk about alien abduction in all this talk we have since 2017 with the New York Times? We talk about tic-tac, gambling, USOs, all kind of light in the sky, but nobody talks about alien abduction.
You bring up two important questions. One indirectly that I'd like to address first. There has grown up, I would call it a combination of myth, belief, assumption, conclusions, that for some reason, Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs thought the aliens are bad, and were only interested in exploring cases where people were in trauma, and that they did not take seriously that many other people had positive experiences. Well, to dismantle that allegation, when Bud started to research this, finally publishing Missing Time, and then Intruders, then Witnessed, etc., the people who were reading these books and coming to him were in fact people who had traumatic or negative or frightening experiences overwhelmingly. And they needed assistance, even if it was as simple as somebody listening to what they had to say and treating them with respect. It's a very simple thing, but you'd be surprised how many times it was ignored, certainly back then. David Jacobs, who was at the time, retired now, a professor of history at a respected university in the state of Philadelphia, in the city of Philadelphia.
Temple University.
Yes, at Temple University. He taught a very popular course, a credit course, on kind of the sociological and historic story of the impact of UFO ideas on American culture. But when he first heard about this painter in New York called Bud Hopkins, who believed that aliens are abducting people, first, he thought he must be crazy, that he was probably damaging the work by making such silly claims, and that this was somebody he never wanted to meet, until a mutual friend who Tracy Torme was a screenwriter, a scriptwriter, a television writer, who's grew up in Los Angeles. His father was a very famous American singer, going back to the big band era days in the 40s. And his father had had a profound UFO sighting growing as an adult, and never stopped talking about it. So he grew up in a UFO friendly atmosphere. And when he and Bud met, Tracy was writing for Saturday Night Live, which Bud thought was a very funny show, and was also a friend of David Jacobs, and convinced David to come and visit Bud. And David told me the story, basically going in there to meet a crazy person and leaving there spun around 180 degrees. Bud shared appropriate colleague-worthy information. And Dave continued to do the research from his point of view. Neither one of them ever denied that people were having positive experiences or that they were just as valid as the folks coming to them. It's just that the people who were coming to them overwhelmingly were not coming to them to talk about how my meeting with this extraterrestrial changed my life, or when the ship landed, I felt this wonderful feeling and then I was able to play the piano wonderfully. They needed help, and they would be invited to visit or go to a session with the support group, but they were the ones who would very quickly realize, got it, there really isn't, this is not a structure that was designed for me, and these people are having a tough time where I'm not really. I want to learn more about what happened to me, etc. By the same token, when Dr. John Mack came into the work, there's this same kind of thought, legend, popular culture vision that he was only interested in these wonderful beatific experiences. And so, folks that had originally approached David Jacobs or Bud and found that they were not finding what they were looking for, often ended up seeing John. By the same token, John was very clear, no ambiguity, that some of these experiences people were having were terrifying, were frightening, were confusing. What John was interested in, and he followed that path right to the end of his life, was what about these experiences? What about these beings? What is there that we human beings can learn from them, from what they're doing, to help us help ourselves? And it's such a simple, pair of facts, but a lot of people still choose to divide, kind of make it sort of a contest or something. Jean, I actually had an experience, Jean, some years ago after giving a talk. You're standing off to the side and there are some people, asking questions. And there were two people within my hearing. And I heard one say, after they had established they had both had experiences, if I'm off, it's by a word. So are you kind of a John Mack type abductee or a Hopkins Jacob abductee? But a great deal has been made of this. And a lot of it's built on a lack of fact. The fact is that now, as opposed to 30 or 40 years ago, it seems that there are a more significant number of very serious reports of people having experiences where they're having positive experiences. And that's great. In interfacing with some of these good folks over the years, especially the ones doing the hard work, collating and publishing this information, which is very important. I've encountered people who felt frustrated or maybe even a little angry that these reports that were being published and experiences by people like Dr. Jacobs and Bud Hopkins was making them look bad, was taking the attention away from the good and putting it on the anxiety provoking. And I remember just trying to explain there's nothing personal here. And in no way do I demean your work, which was another assumption that because I wasn't transferring my allegiance in a way to promoting more of these positive cases, there were plenty of people doing it and doing a very good job of it now. We have to face the fact that we human beings, when we're confronted by an unknown of this vastness and this potential, that we've got to simplify it or codify it. They're good or they're bad. Not necessarily either. We perceive their actions as positive or negative because they scare the shit out of us or they make us feel good. But that doesn't mean that that's their intention. And I know people in the work who will tell you exactly where this type of gray alien comes from, what kind of craft they fly in, what they have for breakfast, every possible thing imaginable that they can't possibly know, except that they're convinced they do know it. We ourselves, even in the service of trying to do good, in our researches, are perceived as not doing good. And I'll give a quick example and we can go on. Let's say that you and I didn't go into this work. We became biologists, and our specialty was seals and weasels and ferrets and otters. Lovely animals, very fun-loving, and they like to play. And through our studies, we had learned there's a kind of otter in a remote area of northern Canada that they're suffering some kind of condition that may condemn the species. So you and I, we get all of our equipment. We're flown in by seaplane or helicopter. We're in complete wilderness. We're there for a week or so. We set up our camp. Then we set up a trap that will not hurt them. And shortly after, we go to the trap and there's an otter in there. Now, you lift the otter out and you're talking to it in a soothing tone. You're petting it. We love you. We won't hurt you. Meanwhile, I have prepared an injection, just given it a shot. Now I'm spray painting a number on its side in Dayglow ink, putting a radio collar around its neck, and then you let it go. This otter is totally freaked out. It looks different. It feels different. It wanders back into the land of the other otters. They see it's different. They go, what the hell happened to you? And they say, you're never going to believe this. Now, that otter was freaked out, and the other otters were, but it was in the service of trying to help the species. That could easily be misinterpreted if you happen to be that otter. But that's my point. We are trying to make this into something good and bad. We understand that from our religious ideas and philosophies, as opposed to we don't know what's happening or why it's happening. So let's invent something to make us feel a little more in control. That may or may not be true.
Yeah, I understood. Thank you. Thank you for this explanation. What I will say briefly is that, John Mark investigation is important, very respected and respectable. Bud Hopkins, David Jacobs. Okay, what is more important even than the name of the investigators is the reality of the experience of people. And we have Debbie Cowbell, and we have Linda Napolitano, and thousands of women, young, who had experiences from their childhood along their life, men also who had experience. And these experiences were terrifying, were painful, with trauma, with terrible nightmares. Whatever will be the answer, the real key to this reality of alien abduction will be accountable or on this suffering, pain, trauma, crime that is undoubtable, that is real. So we cannot forget any time that the pain, the the fear, the terror, the anxiety is real. The flesh that has been traumatized, not only a woman, but a woman in the inner part, the intimate part of her body, etc., and the soul, the pain in the soul. So the important thing that what you just said, that we don't know the answer, but we must be we must go on keeping looking for the answer, because this is a very big issue. And it is Debbie Cowbell which is encouraging her with her beautiful eyes. With her eyes, she tells her, I have no explanation for this pain. I accept this pain, but I don't want to live through pain. I want to have my life. She will have a life, but the crime that she suffered is real, and there is no justice for that. There is no explanation for that. The offender, we don't know who he is and his intention, and he will not be on trial before long. And anyway, that has been a big work carried out by Bud Hopkins. A word about him. How do you explain he was resilient like that? He could face so much suffering, as you said. You didn't want to study the alien abduction, but he did for how many years? How did he not lose his mind after all of this time?
Well, again, when we met 50 years ago, he was just beginning to explore some of these allegations and stories. Up until then, certainly in the United States, the world of abduction researchers felt that they could still be taken seriously by talking about radar returns of anomalous objects, declassified documents, what we call trace cases, where there are physiological changes to organic material that has been close to a UFO or some paranormal situation, like the burn mark in Debbie's yard that we were speaking about earlier. We could talk about sightings that people were having, even looking well into the past, centuries ago, allegations that might be interpreted as a ancient or prehistoric misunderstanding of high technology as opposed to a vision of your gods or what have you. And David Jacobs has a dry sense of humor. The way he put it to me back then was, our attention was on the cars and not the drivers. The moment that you started to take seriously, even among colleagues, that there are aliens, it all wink, wink, nudge, nudge, funny, flying saucers, little green men, it was a very difficult line to cross. And so people kept out of it and, developed these other more conservative aspects. It all really broke open to a degree with the publication of Bud's first book, And then in 1987, within maybe a few weeks, a month or two, Communion, Whitley Strieber's very impacting and influential account of his experiences and his family and friends, was published shortly after or before Intruders was. And in England, Timothy Good's Above Top Secret was also published right then and there. It was a tremendous moment in publishing for us. Each book added to the impact, the believability, and the dynamics of people maybe having a bit more courage in the way they were exploring this and relying more heavily on scientific method. It's funny how in the case of UFO sightings, especially memorable, dramatic ones, skeptics, debunkers will dismiss them because they're just too wild. And where do you draw the line in an area of study where almost everything, sounds like extreme science fiction to somebody who's never been exposed to it? But now you and I live in a world where it's not only okay to talk about all this conventional aspects, radar, declassified documents, now, of course, whistleblowers, because of the ongoing investigations in the House of Representatives. We have people like Congresswoman Luna and
Eric Burleson, Tim Burkett.
Yes, exactly. Tim Burkett. And others coming up behind them. And before our change in government last year, when Marco Rubio was named Secretary of State, he was deeply involved in trying to get to the bottom of this, working very closely, in fact, with one of my congressional representatives, Kirsten Gillibrand, here in New York State. Why that's important to me and should be important to others is she is as liberal as he is conservative. And it didn't matter. They worked together successfully, probably developed at least the beginnings of a friendship and mutual respect for each other. This is one of the few subjects in the world right now that has a potential of bringing people together, as opposed to where so many efforts are aimed in driving people apart and making them hate and mistrust each other. So it may work out, looking back historically, that the benefits of the investigations, the whistleblowing, more and more respected politicos and academics, scientists coming on board with this subject. Again, the future, we may see a college or a junior high school science department named after Avi Loeb or Bud Hopkins or Stanton T. Friedman. It won't surprise me at all, because although now these names are a footnote in a small subculture of the entire world's population, but things change.
We need Peter Robbins Avenue somewhere in New York State.
Thank you.
And there are many others which are not as famous and who did their part and who deserve, yes, this new world, this new paradigm. Okay, we cannot talk about Linda Napolitano. It would be too much time. But just a word another time, if you allow us.
Of course.
Yeah, just about your collaboration in the film industry, in the movie making. I think it's very important to, just before saying goodbye to the French people, your contribution is so amazing also in this field. So what about it? You work on the Travis Walton Travis, a true story of Travis Walton. So what do you say about this movie, for instance, and how do you describe your contribution to this field, to the movie making, documentary, fiction on the UFO reality?
The documentary you're talking about is called Travis Walton, Travis, the true story of Travis Walton. It was made by an American filmmaker named Jennifer Stein, who I had the privilege of introducing to Travis. And she proposed the making of this documentary. He agreed. She spent 5 years working on this film. And I'm biased because, well, I was involved in it as an associate producer. I'm one of the many talking heads that comes on occasionally and makes a comment, but it's such a well-researched and well-validated case, including the kind of evidence, and we didn't even go into much physical evidence on other cases, but that you could bring into a court of law and win if such things were judged in courts of law. It's streaming, and I encourage anyone to watch it. And I will say, especially being that I'm speaking with you, friends and colleagues and strangers who I don't know in France, where I know, I respect, and I understand the level of skepticism around the entire abduction phenomena is greater than it is in the United States. Perhaps that's because we've had the benefit of more media, more books right in public attention, more documentaries.
Things have changed a little in France. There are groups now working on that, and the mentality is moving there. And there are many people giving their accounts to support groups. So things have been changing in France.
Well, I think that's great, and a shameless advertisement. Somebody bring me back to France so that I can be in France again. Oh, and give some talks as well.
It will be great. You will be invited all over France, I'm sure. A tour de France. So another example, you work for several documentaries. Can you give us two instances before saying goodbye?
I've had the honor of working on several dozen, sometimes just as an advisor, other times as, again, a talking head. I was involved in quite a number of documentaries about the UK's best-known UFO incident, the Rendlesham Forest incident.
Britain's Roswell.
Yep. And I have a documentary that I'm very proud of on the circumstances, the life of America's first Secretary of Defense and the circumstances surrounding his death. For me, the idea when I first was exposed to it of, a hush-hush murder of a high-ranking American presence in the government because they knew too much about UFOs, it sounded a little embarrassing and theatrical. But starting in 1987, which was the year I also became very interested in this English case, I started to read up on James Forrestal, do my research, get documents as they were released. And I think I have proven, even only with anecdotal evidence, that James Forrestal had a profound nervous breakdown because of the weight of all of this knowledge that he shared with the President of the United States, who had charged him with getting to the bottom of it, which he wasn't able to do. And he went into a terrible depression, was institutionalized, and we are told committed suicide, but he didn't commit suicide. He was murdered. And that's a documentary that I hope by the end of this year will be streaming on some platform. I have DVDs which people can contact me for, but I will certainly let you know when it is, available for anybody to download.
Yeah.
I just don't remember the names of so many of the other documentaries I've worked in, but I would say right now, if you're going to watch one documentary about a single case, Travis, the true story of Travis Walton, is a terrific example. We have other great filmmakers here, James Fox, and a good number of others, Dean Aiello, who are doing superb work. And more regular folks are starting to watch these documentaries, and not just people like you and me who have a pre-existing interest in them.
Yeah. First thing, do you remember that I purchased your DVD on James Forrestal at Hull at the Outer Limits Magazine's conference in Yorkshire, England?
That's right.
Yeah, I was so proud to meet you there. I was so happy.
I was so moved to receive the copy of the book that you had just published. It was in French, but I know a little French, and just having it meant a lot to me. You did a wonderful job, and of course, you have published in English as well.
Oh, I saw your thank you. I saw your interview with Thiago Tichetti on your channel, and he was handling my translation of his book, UFO Contact au Brésil, UFO Contact in Brazil, a huge
Yep.
book, you remember?
Yes.
And I was very proud to see this show because I have designed the cover myself.
It's a very sophisticated cover, I thought.
It's a teacher, professor of visual arts at the School of Manhattan who tell us. And what else? Yes, the DVD. I hope we can have a talk on it sometime. It would be great to have such a talk.
We'll
a video.
off the air. We'll be speaking, and I'll be glad to come back and talk about the Brooklyn Bridge case and this as well.
Yes. Okay, great. Nothing. Thank you very much for your time, Peter. And I am trying to find a way to have an audio translation now. Not only a subtitle, but audio translation. Some people are supporting me to get the software and to handle it, to have an audio translation with a voice quite fitted to the original file. So thank you, and have a good day, good afternoon, Peter. Here is night already.
And you as well, Jean.
Goodbye, Peter.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.